Clark to make some comments first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, this is my 15th year as a city councilor. I've worked hard to live up to the expectations of the voters who put me in this office, and I count it a privilege and a great honor to have been elected to be a voice for the citizens of Ward 4. After much consideration, and with the full support of my family, I announced my resignation effective April 10, 2017 at 12:01 a.m. Realizing there's a procedure in place to accept applications for appointment and conduct interviews before selection made, I encourage my fellow councilors to take these steps as soon as practical because there is still a lot of hard work ahead of us. In keeping with the past practice under similar circumstances, I enthusiastically recommend Jennifer Solomon be appointed to complete my term, which ends January 2019. She has previously served 2 full terms on the City Council, representing the citizens of Ward 6 when she lived in that ward. And with her experience on boards, committees, and commissions, both as a private citizen and in her capacity as City Councilor, I consider Jennifer extremely qualified to assume the Ward 4 seat, and I believe her to be the only person in this ward that would be able to hit the ground running and happy to do so. Jennifer Solomon has the desire and the full support of her family to perform the duties with the dedication they deserve. I would be remiss if I did not say what a pleasure it has been to work with my fellow councilors, past and present, and there's one here in the audience today, and Eugene's dedicated and professional staff. Very proud of the staff we have, John. To my constituents in Ward 4, I want to express my sincere thanks and appreciation for the privilege you have afforded me to represent you for these many years. You are the best. Last but not least, I'd like to thank my chief of staff, my darling bride, Glenda, for putting up with this for 15 years, and my daughter, Tara, and her family. Thank you.
Thank you. And that must have been a painful decision. I am sorry to see you go. I was looking forward to working with you, and thank you for all of your service. I know that Councilor Clark wants to speak to this.
It has been my privilege to sit next to and around the table with this man for 10 years on the council, and I want to be first to say that it's been an honor to serve with you, sir. And I understand your decision. And I hope that the people of our community truly understand the amount that you've given over many more than 15 years to serve our community and to serve the public. And what an honor it's been to serve with you. And we're going to miss you at this table. But you've earned, hard-earned, the opportunity to rest a bit. So thank you for serving.
Chris?
Yeah, when I first got on the council in 2005, I looked to George to be one of those balanced, thoughtful, and deliberate people. And it took a lot of my way of doing things from watching George and the way he did things. And I have always admired his ability to try to approach every issue in its own merits and to look at things in terms of what's best for the community. I'm going to miss you. It's been great serving the last 12 years with you, and I wish you the best in wherever you go from here. And I hope you'll stay in touch with us because your contribution to the council has been enormous, and I owe a lot of how much I'm able to do today to following your example.
Lord, it's been my honor and my pleasure to serve with you. And definitely will miss you. And I think only counselors and their families know how much actually it takes to do all this. And so from somebody who knows, appreciate the work that you put in over the years and the services you provide to the city. You represented your ward very well. And I appreciated all the experience and insight that you brought. And when I came on the council 10 years ago with Mike, you were one of the people I looked to. Okay, that's how you do it. So I very much appreciated that, and so good luck. You deserve a break, and I think you'll be well remembered as a city councilor in Eugene.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mayor, could I get in the queue?
Yes, let's give Claire a chance. Yes, Claire and Emily. Yeah, Claire and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. George, I'm sorry I'm not there in person because I think this might have been my last opportunity to shake your hand as a fellow city councilor, and thank you for your service. I am sure this was a difficult decision for you. I know you really value the role that you have here on council, and I want to echo my colleagues' sentiments that I feel like you've provided a really great example of how to comport oneself as a city councilor and consider the needs of your ward and then the greater needs of the city. And I've really appreciated your mentorship and your support of me as I've gone through difficult time this past few months. And we'll definitely miss serving with you. So thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Claire.
Emily?
Well, I'm surprised and I'm disappointed. I've only gotten to work with you for a couple months, but I've been coming here for 5 years, so I've certainly seen you working. And although we have often disagreed, I've really admired your thoughtfulness and your willingness to look at an issue from different sides. You're often quiet, but when you do speak, you're right on the money with your thoughts. So I really have admired your service and your attention. And so I will actually miss you too. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mike, one more.
Yeah, I want to say that George and I have a funny story between us that we don't tell in public very much, but I think this is the right time to tell it. Ellen brought it up, and Chris specifically too. When starting as a new counselor, looked to George so many times for how to behave appropriately, and I've tried over the years to kind of mellow a bit my strong feelings about things. But when I started, I often felt very strongly about something, and when my ability to sit here and listen and my cheeks would start to flush, there were several times when George would lean over to me and he'd say, "Put the stick down." And counsel me to, be patient. And I'm going to miss that. Thank you, my friend, for that great advice.
I'll get a bumper sticker made.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your thoughts about what happens next. And I'm glad we have the benefit of your wise counsel today in today's meeting. And I hope you will keep in touch. So thank you so much. And now,
Isn't it a miss reading packets, George?
Really?
I mean, you actually get to read a book or something like that.
After,
Yeah, they'll still be online.
yeah, that's true. But after 45 years of public service, it's just, it's not any one thing. It was just time to fully enjoy my retirement. And I think at my age now, I want to take advantage of that while I still have reasonably good health.
right. And it's a credit to you to know when that time has come. So thank you very much. And now we will proceed with the work sort of as scheduled, newly scheduled. So, City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Mike McCarrow to work us through this conversation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Mike McCarroll, Land Use Analyst with the Planning and Development Department. And our work session today provides an opportunity to share information on whether Eugene should adopt a 1,000-foot separation standard between any new and existing marijuana businesses. Recently, 5 individuals requested that the city adopt the standard representing the marijuana industry. And through the polling process, the council asked for information in 3 specific areas, which I'll provide today. And we'll also provide some information on OLCC exception ordinances that the council's dealt with in the past months. Our current land use code considers both medical and recreational marijuana businesses as specialty stores. They're permitted outright in the C1, C2, and C3 zones. Oregon Liquor Control Commission application process does require checking in with the local jurisdiction to make sure that the proposed business is in the correct zone. And so we do that routinely. The first information request in the poll asks for the number, grouping, and impacts of existing marijuana dispensaries in Eugene. and there's a 3-page map exhibit in your packet that shows the location of these retail businesses. Eugene currently has 5 medical marijuana dispensaries and 28 recreational marijuana businesses in town. And 15 of the businesses are located closer than 1,000 feet from at least one other related business. And so that's about half of our current businesses. 1,000 feet, just to get an idea, that's about 2.5 standard blocks as far as that distance goes. Now, the businesses that are within 1,000 feet of another one are generally in the greater downtown area or along 6th and 7th Avenue east of Chambers. Staff has approved numerous business locations as part of the OLCC process that have not yet been issued a license by OLCC. And so when those that are still in process get a license, they notify the city, and then we will add them to this map that you are looking at for those locations. State law prohibits use and smoking of marijuana products in public places, and so if you're like me, walking by or driving by these uses, there's no obvious impact that's any different from any other recreational use. That's been my experience, at least. From the Eugene Police Department perspective, cash-only businesses such as these do attract criminals looking for money and product, and so there have been burglaries, thefts at these businesses. Those statistics, we only have a year or so worth of those, so it's too early to see if there's any trends with that specific. One officer did share with me that she was aware that Denver has a lot of marijuana businesses located in one neighborhood, and that's kind of created the feel of an informal marijuana district in Denver, in that large community. And in general, police prefer cash-only businesses to be dispersed rather than concentrated in any one area. So the second poll item involves info about local ownership. This goes all the way back to the legislature in 2015. There was a bill that was passed that required owners of marijuana business to have 50% or more majority of Oregon residency. However, in 2016, due to public testimony, some legal issues, and the difficulty in confirming that standard was being met, the legislature rescinded that requirement. The city doesn't have data regarding local ownership of any businesses, and neither the OLCC nor any of the Oregon cities research for our discussion today have ownership requirements or ownership data that's readily available. There may be some legal limitations associated with a policy that would require or favor local ownership. This policy came up some time ago as part of a multi-unit property tax exemption, MUPTE discussion, and the council decided not to pursue that idea at that time. The final request from the poll is to compare the separation standard. How are other Oregon cities doing it? And so of the 9 other cities explored in preparation for today, 5 of them have a 1,000-foot separation requirement, and 4 of them do not. So Portland, Hillsborough, Beaverton, Gresham, and Bend do have that requirement, and Salem, Corvallis, Springfield, and Medford do not. So it's clear Eugene is not the only city in Oregon without a 1,000-foot separation standard. Portland regulates over 100 retail marijuana businesses. They have a very involved local process, licensing process there, with a $5,000 startup fee and a renewal of $750 every year. Some people in the industry see that as just kind of duplicating the state process. It's interesting that Bend was the only city study that has a separation requirement for daycare uses. They require 150-foot separation from a daycare, and they use the state definition of child care facility, which is for caring of 17 or more children. So in addition to that discussion about the 1,000-foot separation from retail marijuana businesses from each other, there's an opportunity today to discuss policy on when council considers exemptions to the OLCC 1,000-foot separation from a school. And there have been 2 exception ordinances passed in the last 3 months by council, and there's a current request pending. And so just to look at these quickly, in the first exception, OLCC discovered a school within 1,000 feet of an existing operating marijuana dispensary. In the second example, a school was identified once the applicant was almost to the end of their application process. They had done significant investments in their business. And so in both of those cases, an arterial street exists between the school and the business. And so staff suggests using 2 criteria to determine which exception requests are discussed at the council level. So the first would be neither the OLCC, their information about existing schools that they are aware of, nor the applicant is aware of a school within 1,000 feet of the proposed business at the time that the business owner submits their application to OLCC. And secondly, there's an arterial street with at least 20,000 average daily traffic between the school and the proposed business. And both of these previous exemptions meet both of these criteria. So I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Okay, questions? Anyone in the queue here? George. Chris? George? Hey, Chris?
I'd like to be in the queue, Mayor.
All right.
I'm glad you brought up the notion of what's the policy questions for us versus what may be, business or commerce questions, which is another kind of conversation. The request that came before the staff to then be brought to the council, was this initiated primarily by other retail marijuana owners, or did anybody else from the community come forward with this request? Who came forward with this request?
So, and just to clarify, the 1,000-foot separation between retail businesses, my understanding is that was primarily initiated through 5 members of the public forum on January 23rd that came and testified and said, we would like this standard adopted by the city.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any other.
You're not aware of any others?
Input, no.
Okay, because I've had a couple of people who have spoken to me about it, but they're in the marijuana business. So that's so the 5 people that spoke at the public forum, do we know what their interest was? Were they owners or were they just general citizens? Do we know? 4
of the 5 identified themselves at the public forum as being involved either as a manager or as part of a store.
Yeah, I think for me at least, that's significant in knowing or trying to understand why something comes up. I mean, I'm always, why is this an issue? And I understand from the policy standpoint the desire to protect schools or other public infrastructure. I think that's a very valuable thing to talk about, and we can talk about how we can make those policy decisions to try to revise, improve, and tweak those areas. But the other side of it, which is what is the role of the city in terms of regulating competitive commerce? Do we regulate other kinds of commerce? Do we have buffers for other kinds of businesses?
No, since our first zoning ordinance in 1948, this would be the first time there would be a separation requirement for a business. The closest thing in our code would be to a 200-foot separation requirement for some freestanding signs in industrial commercial zones.
So for signage?
But not for a business.
So you talk about cash-only businesses, fast food restaurants, we don't regulate their distance, or gas stations. Do liquor stores have a distance regulation?
They don't in the local code, and I'm not familiar with OLCC standards. They might at the state level with OLCC.
They do at the state level, might have one.
Ordinance.
Okay, there might be one in place. Yeah, I'm just curious the degree to which the city becomes engaged in starting to regulate the regular operation of commerce. To what degree should we do that? And that's why I was asking, where is this coming from? If I'm hearing the community as a body say, we think this is an important enough issue, we need to take this up in terms of regulating this one industry when we don't regulate any other industries. That's the thing for me. Why do I pick one industry to start regulating unless there is some, I guess the word I would use is a compelling need. And the compelling need for me would be the entire community identifies it as a compelling need. And at this point, I'm hearing only folks within the industry are the real identifiers of the compelling need. So I really don't know exactly where I want to come down on this, but I've got some criteria that I would need to see satisfied of the compelling need to do this before I would start monkeying around in business and commerce. So I think that for me would be, I would want to hear more about how it achieves that standard of a community need versus something that some folks within an industry want to protect themselves from other folks within the same industry. I want to hear more about that.
George?
Thank you. I like the suggestion on the two criteria for the exemptions. Would that have to be done by changing the ordinance, or is that an administrative rule? How would we accomplish that?
It could be done either way. In order to get that kind of exemption, the city council needs to pass an ordinance. What you're talking about here, though, is at what point would staff bring you something? If the only thing you decide to do with respect to the issues that Mike has talked about is to deal with the exemption issue, then I think you can just give direction to the city manager to say, if you get a request that doesn't meet these two criteria, don't bring it to us. Now, that individual can still come to any of you and ask you to take it up, but at least the city manager would know not to do it. Should you decide to take some of the other issues like 1,000-foot separation generally and put it into an ordinance, then there's no reason not to add that provision to that ordinance anyway. But I wouldn't recommend doing an ordinance just to establish the criteria for when you will consider another ordinance.
Well, I do like the criteria for the exceptions. However, in the EIS, it says, and neither the applicant nor the OLCC was aware that a school is located within 1,000 feet. How do we, as a city, determine that the applicant was not aware or was aware if a school was within the distance?
I tried to write that, had 3 different versions. The idea is that, hey, everybody that's involved, the regulating agency, OLCC, and the applicant, nobody knows there's a school there. So if you're already aware that there's a school within 1,000 feet, and there's a collector street or a local street, that there has to be a barrier in order to have this exception. It seems like in both cases previously, we were trying to support a business that was already either operating or had made a significant investment. And so this would signify not that every potential business that is a minimum 500 feet from a school could just get an exception by going through the process. So it was just trying to, and we can maybe word that in a different way, that there's no knowledge at the time that they apply that there's a school close.
Is there any type of research done by city staff before an applicant is accepted and the fees are paid to address this?
Yes, the process we have now that's part of that OLCC process is called a land use compatibility statement. And so when an applicant comes in, we look at the zoning. Right now, zoning is the only criteria. And then we put that in writing. They take that back to OLCC as part of their application.
Okay. And, wow, that's quick. Chris, you were talking about regulating the business. In a way, we already have addressed regulating the recreational marijuana business by adding the tax on, which was allowed by state law. Now, the 1,000-foot rule was, if I remember correctly, was in effect for the medical marijuana, and when they went to the recreational, for some reason it dropped off the books. Is that
that is correct.
That's correct. Okay. So I was in favor of having this work session because I wanted to hear what our options were. I wanted to hear what the public had to say about it. And if we decide to go with a public hearing, even though I'm not going to be here, I think it would be at least worth our time to have that additional input before we say, yes, let's continue on down the road, or or no. I know it's extra work for staff, but I think it's information that we do need to get out to the counselors to make an educated decision on it.
Okay, Claire? Claire,
Mute button, Claire.
Euler?
you're up.
Bueller.
Sorry, my phone locked up. I thought I had taken it off. Thank you, Mayor. I apologize.
That's okay.
That feeling. Oh, come on.
Yeah. So actually, just as a little bit of background, I sponsored the original work session on the tax and potential regulation back in the fall, and the council ended up at the first session, spending our time talking about the tax, which I totally understand. And then I did that request on the 1,000-foot buffer question at the request of a cannabis business association, which a number of our local dispensaries are members of. So I missed the follow-up session that we discussed this further, or if I hadn't missed that, I would have asked us to discuss this matter then. That being said, I want to be clear because I don't want there to be a misconception. I'm not advocating for this 1,000-foot buffer. I was trying to be responsive to those businesses to ask us to have this conversation. And right now, I'm not convinced that we need to add additional regulation to this emerging retail sector. But I am glad that the council is discussing this. I was glad to get the information from staff that Salem, Medford, and Corvallis have not taken any action to regulate their local retail shops beyond what the state has required. That tells me we would not be exceptional if we decided not to take action on this. I did want to ask city staff if they're able to remind us a little bit what other kind of business licenses do we have in place? My recollection is we don't have a lot of business license requirements compared maybe with some other localities. And so just in general, is it a dozen licenses? Is it 6? Is it 0? Can you give me a ballpark?
Well, as far as other businesses that require a local licensing process, taxis are the primary one. There are, I believe, private medical taxis that are included in that. And that is the only one that comes to mind. There may be additional. I can double check on that. But it's very.
Because I remember, I think it was with the meeting the challenge task force. I think at one point we got a list, and it was pretty small how many businesses we require additional retail licensing. And my feeling is that I would like these businesses to be treated like any other that we have in town in terms of retail establishments, and the state has set, I think, pretty rigorous regulations on these shops in terms of security, location, testing, and other aspects of their business. And right now, we don't have a clamoring from the general public that there's a concern. So one question I also have for staff, if we don't take action now and a year from now we have neighborhoods that just feel inundated by too many shops, what might be a course of action we could take at that point?
They're established, you mean?
So, Claire, the two different ways to approach that question. One is, what could the council do prospectively? And the answer to that question is the same thing that you can do today. So it's not like you either take action, you adopt an ordinance in 2017 to establish buffers, or you lose the authority to do so. You would be able to adopt the same buffers, assuming state legislation doesn't change. You would be able to adopt the same thing in 2018 or 2019 that you could adopt in 2017. In terms of businesses that are already in place, I would need to do a little research to confirm what I'll tell you preliminarily is it would be difficult for the council without paying dollars to the businesses to try to say you're now an unlawful business and so you need to shut down.
Yeah, and that would not be a policy I would be interested in pursuing. It would be for any new businesses that might open that we might consider that. And lastly, I'll say I appreciate the staff recommendation on criteria for future exemptions. I think it's fair and clear and workable, and so I would be happy with staff going forward in an administrative process to put that in place.
Okay, thank you. Emily?
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I'm curious what the reasoning is for the medical marijuana dispensaries to have had a buffer, but not the recreational.
In talking with OLCC, a policy analyst, because I was able to learn a lot about this topic as well doing research for today, the understanding I have is that when when that became available, that was viewed as an important value for the state and the local communities that it was in. When recreational marijuana became available, the idea of marijuana in the community had been around for a while, and the legislature chose to allow each local community to decide whether that was an appropriate standard or not.
Do you know if the state, you don't know if the state has any regulations about the proximity of liquor stores?
I am not aware of those standards.
Okay, I'm not either, but I would guess that since we don't have very many liquor stores and none of them are close to each other, that, and it's a great business, you'd want competition, that there are some restrictions on that, but I don't know. So marijuana and liquor are the only things regulated by OLCC. And bars?
So, yes, again, not being the expert on this, but my understanding is that OLCC will regulate any businesses that have liquor consumption. So that would include liquor stores, bars and taverns. I know I've worked with the compliance team that we're doing with the city, working with OLCC staff for having patios for bars and not, having enough enclosure so they're not passing liquor out.
Thank you. I think that there's a difference between liquor stores and bars and restaurants in that you do not consume the product there. It's a takeout business, essentially. And marijuana dispensaries are the same. You cannot consume it there. So to me, liquor stores and marijuana dispensaries are quite similar. And I believe that we do regulate their distance. And I want to reiterate what George says in that we've already set the precedent of treating marijuana dispensaries differently from every single other business in Eugene in that we tax them. So comparing them to bookstores and grocery stores, I think is not really right or fair. And then a comment that the general public has made to me is Eugene's already hippie town, and proliferation of dispensaries very close to each other would emphasize and reinforce that. And is that what we want to be known as? And yes, they would compete with each other and reduce the number of dispensaries, we would assume, but you can't actually know that. So those are some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo many of the comments of my colleagues, especially Chris and George, with regard to the restraint and restrictions issue. I would go a little further and say that my default position is that in order for us to act in restraint of commerce of some way in our community, that I need to see a very compelling public interest to do so. And in this case, I don't yet. I had some of the folks from the association talk about the influx of out-of-state companies and everything else. I hear other people talk about, you know, proliferation of stores if we don't, and some of the comments around that. And I have to say that I think the private market is a wonderful thing. It's one of the most democratic institutions there is. And the thing I would say is, if we end up with a retail marijuana business on every block that and the market has that level of demand and can sustain it, I would say we might want to really think about telling the majority of folks in our community that they can't have that if there's that level of demand. And so I will wait to hear the compelling interest in us creating a buffer before feeling the need to do so. There are a couple of questions, though, I have around this, and perhaps staff can help me with these. One would be the state law and its grandfathering aspects. Sometimes, for example, the issue around the buffer with schools, sometimes it's not the business that moves in, but the school that moves in. And I want to know if the grandfathering works the other way around. If a marijuana business is located and somebody who teaches karate to kids, right, just to grab an example out of the air, and we call that a school, moves in, in a strip mall next door, and then they have to renew their annual license, and now suddenly they're next door to a school. Do we have our code well enough situated for that business to be protected and be able to re-up their license in such a case?
That would be something that OLCC would be in charge of, and I did ask staff, and they confirmed that if a school would meet their definition of a school, primary, secondary, public or private school, would move in at a location less than 1,000 feet from an existing business, then that business would continue to get annual renewals.
Okay, so they're grandfathered in that way and protected for their investment.
Right. My understanding of like a karate business where children might be coming to the business, that would not meet their definition of a
school. Okay. The second one is this. I'm less familiar with the federal issues around banking when it comes to these businesses. Do I have it correct in that most banks are prohibited from, or at least restricted in their interactions with marijuana sales?
That is a topic I do not know about.
Well, and I see I'm running out of time, and I guess maybe I'll need a second round. The reason for my question is this: if these sort of businesses are required, and I don't know the answer, because of federal involvement to be cash only, is that what kind of a target or a nuisance, attractive nuisance, for lack of a better way to describe it, is that to potential crime issues? So that's a question of mine.
Alan?
Yeah, so we already have the buffer for the schools, 1,000 foot, and I like the guideline of the arterial street, but I'm not sure what awareness means. It seemed to me where schools are is pretty darn easy to find out and very, very obvious, and so maybe it's the definition of a school, but even a charter school pops up. I know where they are. I know where most of them are if I was looking. It wouldn't be that difficult. I'm trying to figure out how that could actually occur that someone wouldn't be aware.
Well, in both cases with the two exception ordinances that were previously passed, they both involved Looking Glass, two separate locations where they have property or a tenant where they provided services to I believe it was high school children, youth. And so at first look, it would not look like a traditional school. And it's just upon further analysis, is my understanding, that OLC staff said, yes, we believe this does meet our definition of a school. And that's why it was kind of a surprise to both of those business owners.
And that's a pretty non-traditional school, for instance.
Right.
And it's 1,000 foot as the crow flies, not as the person walks.
This is very specific for OLCC standards. So it is from the property line of the school to the wall of the building housing the business.
So as the crow flies, not yes. So
Yes,
if
but-
you had to walk there, it could be like
Correct.
1,500 feet. But if you were able to fly
Correct.
and be high to do that, you could. Sorry, I had to get that one in.
Break into Allman Brothers here.
I had the same question about what about school that comes in later, but I got that cleared up. When I look at the map, it's very interesting. And half are within the 1,000-foot buffer. Of those, most of them are in the downtown area. They're not like necessarily right next to each other. The ones on Oak Street are kind of one business apart. But when you look at this map, it looks pretty spread out for the most part. And it was also interesting to me that it was 5-4 in cities that have a buffer, 4 don't, 5 do. Do we know why the legislature and the OLCC did not include the 1,000-foot buffer for recreational marijuana? I assume it wasn't a typo.
In my short conversation with the policy analyst for OLCC, she just mentioned that at the time, the legislature decided to let that be partially because of home rule state, let each city decide if that was appropriate for their community.
Okay. Do you know if we have a disproportionate amount of recreational marijuana stores compared to those other 9 cities that we were talking about?
Of the 15 cities over 50,000 in population, Portland has 103 businesses. We are second with our 32. Bend is third with 18. Salem is fourth with 16. And there aren't any other in double figures after those cities.
Yeah, but we're 6 times as big as, or twice as big as Bend too. And we are second in the state. So that, sort of. But I would think that urban areas, this type of business would be more inclined to locate than rural areas anyway, and smaller cities. So the arguments in favor of doing this, I think, would be that we don't want one on every corner. I don't really see that happening. And that out-of-state well-funded businesses are going to come in and drive local businesses out. Kind of have a hard time seeing that, too. In fact, the one potential business investor testified that they are a local person that spent an enormous amount of money, and it would prevent them from doing a local investment. So kind of having a hard time with that one. And then there would have to be some kind of overriding public benefit, public interest to be had from the regulation, something unique about this business that makes it so different than every other business that we would need to do this kind of regulation. And I'm hard pressed kind of come up with that rationale as well. And then finally, the clamor from the public as opposed to just existing industry seeking protection from competition. It's kind of hard to tell, but it seems like it's just the local businesses that are bringing this forward, not necessarily the public. So I think the market actually is going to shake this out eventually, as it does with every other business, except for coffee, I think. Coffee. That was a joke.
Yes, sorry. Didn't laugh, but it's a good joke. Okay. So, Chris, you want another round?
Yeah, to try to hone in on the notion of the compelling need, questions I would have. I just did a quick scan of the OLCC requirements. I didn't see anything around distance under licensing, so it would be nice if somebody could check that and see if there is a requirement there. Looking at parallel types of business. Another one around compelling need is an understanding of, is a marijuana retail sales operation inherently high risk or an inherent risk as opposed to other kinds of businesses, even including liquor stores. What I want to determine is just the existence of a marijuana dispensary an inherent risk? Is it are the people that shop there worse than the people that shop at other stores? What would be a compelling need that somehow a marijuana store is uniquely different and needs to therefore be regulated to a higher degree? I think we've all agreed that the notions around buffers for schools or other community institutions is a reasonable one. I think we're working in that direction. That would be really good. But the area I don't want to be drawn into is the notion of the Eugene City Council beginning to regulate competition. I think that's a difficult one for me, and what I need to be reassured that we're doing this because there is a compelling need that benefits the community, whether through the kind of store it is, the kind of people that shop there, the inherent risk in this kind of a store, versus, well, I want you to do it because I don't want competition. I wouldn't want to do this because I'm being asked to regulate competition. I would want to do this because I see there's a need, and what you can help me to do is understand what the potential compelling needs might be. Based on type of shopping, crime, and other factors, what those would be.
Mike, another round?
I think...
Mayor, could I get in the queue?
Yes.
I think I got my statement out there at the end of what I was saying last time, but I guess I would ask this. I'd really like to know more about as Chris mentioned, what I'm going to clumsily call the attractive nuisance potential, specifically around having large amounts of unsecured cash on the premises if business is conducted without the capacity to do banking in a more traditional way. I just don't know the answer to that question, and I'd like to, and I'm not sure I would do anything about it or what would be the right thing to do in such a case, or, I'm not necessarily sure we would. I just would be interested to know if that's the case. And just for those of you doing the math at home, there are well more than 3 times as many people in Portland, and certainly we're about the same size as Salem, which makes us the highest concentration per capita in the state. Pretty easily, I would think here.
We're number one.
We're number one, right? But again, I'm pretty sure that the market, as this is still relatively new, I'm sure that the market will level out to the demand that exists in the community in the appropriate way without us doing a thing. So, thanks.
Claire?
Thank you, Mayor. So this was exactly the conversation I was hoping we would have as a council, and I thank you very much, everyone, for your thoughtful comments. And just a few responses. I actually think, even though Councilor Zelenka said it is a joke, that the coffee kiosk, coffee shop analogy is a good one. There are a lot of coffee places in this town, and those with better product pricing and service get the business and succeed. That's how it works. I do think liquor stores, my understanding is they are basically run by OLCC. They are not necessarily for-profit businesses the way these shops will be. OLCC sets the prices, decides where they can locate, and there's no pricing competition amongst liquor stores the way there will be with retail cannabis shops. And I'm also, right now, really seeing future and current shops refurbishing formerly rundown properties around town, and in my mind, creating a more positive retail environment in some places. So overall, I think to a large extent, this is going to be a positive new retail that we have in town. And right now, I'm not hearing from the public, from the general public who doesn't have an investment in these businesses, that they are concerned about a proliferation. I agree with my colleagues that the market will, decide who stays and who doesn't. And as far as Eugene having a reputation as a hippie town, there's no getting rid of that. That's,
Are you sure?
I think, here to stay, regardless of what kind of action we take on this particular agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Alan, right, you want to do one more?
Yeah, I do think the market will shake this out. Said something interesting, Mike, about if you have that many new stores and they're all located next to each other, then that shows a demand for it. I also agree, and that's a good point. it is a kind of also it's a local economic development. It's very rare that we get new markets, but this one is one of the few rare new markets because it's a completely new product on a large scale. And so it's kind of like an economic development. And this is the state tagline. This is no joke. The state tagline for the economic development is grow your own. So we are in Eugene. We're not going to get rid of our local hippy dippy reputation anytime soon. The fact that we have a local tax on it means the more that we have, even per capita, is the more money that gets to be spent on those things that we've looked at, community court and parks and other things that we tag this for. So
Work for Vegas.
Grow your own seems to work with the state motto that she flies with her own wings.
Maybe I could just recap and then ask one question. It doesn't sound like there's a compelling interest in us coming back with a proposed ordinance at this time. What I would suggest is by the end of the year, we'll have collected a lot more data around some of the safety issues and could be other kinds of things. And so maybe what we do is we provide an end of the year report, which then you can choose to do something or not with that comes off that. The one specific item that we've had a request for is whether or not daycare centers, you want to include those as part of that definition that mirrors more like a school. And so as Mike mentioned in Ben, they've included the state's definition as daycare to make that the equivalent of a school. And so we have had a specific request or two from daycare centers around that. So it would be helpful for us to get some direction from the council that would take an ordinance. And so if you want to do that, we would bring back that as a proposed ordinance, which would be separate from the 1,000-foot conversations.
And that would be an ordinance regarding these several exceptions. Do we need an ordinance on the two proposed exceptions? Do we need an ordinance for all of that?
So if the two exceptions you're talking about were the criteria, if
Right.
you want to allow somebody less than 1,000 feet, more than 500 feet, you don't need an ordinance on that. If you were going to do an ordinance for daycare separation, then I'd go ahead and put it into the same ordinance. Otherwise, you would just, the manager heard, okay, you like that criteria, so he would not be bringing to you any request for an exception if a business wanted to locate less than 1,000 feet. The business might contact you directly, but otherwise he wouldn't bring it to you.
So,
Could I get in the queue, Mayor?
yes, go right ahead.
So on the daycare exception, I would not support us doing that. Presumably, the 1,000-foot buffer between schools is to prevent ambulatory high school students and middle school students from walking past the retail shop or trying to get into the retail shop. Presumably, kids in daycare are picked up and dropped off by their parents, who therefore are supervising their children directly. So I really don't see the impetus for including daycare centers in that 1,000-foot buffer.
Emily?
Thank you, Claire. That was exactly what I was going to say.
Right.
Here.
Right. Yeah, Mike?
I as a father of a couple of kids, mine were who are now in high school. Mine were, I think they were either in or close to middle school while they were still taking advantage of what would technically be daycare, I suppose, during the summer months. They were a part of the Sheldon Community Center's, kids camp thing that took place there that technically is daycare. And so in the summers, you're going to have some preteens and some young teens who are going to be in that setting as well. And I would suggest that I might be in favor of that in such a case. So if that factors into you're doing a head count here, I as to whether or not to bring that forward, I would probably support that.
Alan?
Yeah, I kind of, or Claire's that, I think some of the daycares are right around schools on purpose because they drop kids off in there. So it usually will get handled by the 1,000-foot buffer from the school. So when I think of daycare, I think of people dropping off their kids and picking them up that are supervised by their parents and adults. So I don't know necessarily need to look at this as a regulation.
It seems to me, just to concur with the manager's comments, that we actually would just like more information about the impact of this growing retail industry, how it evolves in our community, data that we can collect. And I think even with the daycares, the anxiety that parents may have about what's happening in front of those establishments may be the issue. And, I don't think we have a lot of evidence that that's a problem, but more info seems worthwhile. So I'm seeing that the sense of the council is to follow your suggestion and watch it for a year, collect that data, and come back. So thank you very much. Thank you for the report. Okay. Yeah, sure.
If we're not going to decide this for quite a while, then I assume any dispensary that starts up between now and then could be right next door.
Right.
Correct.
There's no regulation on distance. Separation distance.
Might not be.
Not a great business decision, but yeah, right.
So basically, we've decided no to.
For the moment, we've decided no. We've decided let's let
9 months.
Yes, although keeping in mind that as counselors, you can always request that we revisit it sooner. So if you're hearing from constituents, if you have a concern, you can always say, let's bring that back up for another work session.
Thank you. I would also encourage the general public to weigh in. I think that's really important. So maybe we need to ask them.
Right. So that's a perfectly good option, I think. Okay, now on to our second item of business.
Thanks, Mayor. And this is Joe Epley with our fire department and manages our Toxic Right to Know program. And I know you had questions about the pending legislation or proposed legislation at the state, and there were some timing issues on that. So we're here either to provide some information, answer questions, however you would like to move forward on the conversation.
So I don't know that the council's received the full memorandum. I'm wondering if you could walk the council through just a couple of points about what this, or all of it, what this proposed bill does and how it relates to what is currently in place with the city's Toxic Right to Know.
Yes. So as city manager said, I'm Joe Epley. I'm the Eugene Toxics Right to Know program manager. And I'll just kind of provide a brief executive summary of the memo that I submitted earlier, going through each of the House bills, and then kind of open the floor for questions to see what you guys have. So on House Bill 2669, this could have significant financial and operational impacts on the city's administration of the Eugene Toxics Right to Know program. And so staff recommendation is to have a neutral position with a priority 1. It will not eliminate Eugene's program because that can only be done by a ballot measure and a vote of the public. This House bill is proposing a fee cap increase to $10,000, which would help address the Eugene's program structural funding issue by distributing program costs among all businesses in the program more evenly, and lessening the financial burden of any budget increases on the smaller businesses. This bill would also increase the reporting threshold, it would reduce the reporting threshold, which would increase the number of businesses that would report under the program, having the trickle-down effect of possibly needing more staff to manage and oversee the program. This program also provides an easily adopted framework for any level of government to voluntarily implement a community right to know program, where the way it's set up now, it's almost impossible. And Eugene, that's why Eugene is the only locality that has their own community right to know program. Pushback from industry should be expected. And I also want to highlight that the Toxics Board, who is the policy recommending group on the Eugene's program, has recommended supporting legislative action to increase the $2,000 state mandated fee cap and include language to allow the cap to be adjusted to reflect changes in CPI. Additionally, the current chair of the Toxics Board, Lisa Arkin, who is the executive director for Beyond Toxics, has been working on these bills. And this morning she sent a few bullet points that I'd like to read to you also. She wanted to highlight that the lower reporting threshold of £1,000 per year. And she wanted to emphasize that the $10,000 state mandated fee cap increase is optional, not mandatory. Any fee increase must first be proposed and approved by a local government. So this bill still gives local control. And also emphasizing that House bill gives the option for a city to figure out a formula using both full-time equivalent employees to base the fee on, as well as pounds of chemicals emitted. But again, that would have to be adopted at the local level. And then another thing this bill would do is increase the lowest reporting level for extremely hazardous substances, which would lessen the reporting burden on businesses, which is an ongoing goal. In regards to Senate Bill 995, this could have some financial and operational impacts on the city organization, or possibly not. It's really hard to determine at this point. But given the fact that it could, staff recommendation is to have a neutral position with a priority 2. And this bill would require statewide mandatory of full materials balance accounting, which is the same detailed accounting that the Eugene program has. But instead, this bill has the reports going to DEQ, and it's in the same, using the same manufacturers that Eugene's program uses, in addition to those that fall in the following categories: steam electric power plants, auto wash establishments, and other laundries, such as linen supplies and diaper services, mining, and coal mining. And then I'd like to highlight that the Toxics Board has recommended coordinating reporting at the federal, state, and local level, because this bill does have potential to require more reporting on a lot of the same substances to a different organization, as we already have a lot of. And then both of these bills do have the potential to have an impact on me, the Toxics Program staff, knowing that I am probably the person that knows the most about materials balancing and how it works and how it impacts the industry as well as the city organization. So we foresee me being tapped to provide guidance to DEQ as they move forward in implementation. So I'm opening up for questions.
Thank you. People in the queue. Mike is first. Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, by the way, Joe, for, excuse me, for all that information. Greatly appreciate it. Could you tell me what the current threshold for reporting pounds per year is?
2,640 pounds.
So this cuts it in half.
More than.
So essentially, would you estimate the number of businesses that now brings in under the threshold in Eugene?
I do not know that number, but what I could do is work with, in the Eugene program, we have 2 levels of businesses: those that meet the 2,640 pound threshold, which are reporting, and those that pay a fee but don't report because they don't use that many substances.
You just said, I'm sorry, the 2,000, how many?
2,640 pounds.
So dropping it to 1,000 is quite a bit more than just in half. It's 40%. It's dropping it down to 40%. So that's just one of several. The issue around reporting level for hazardous substances drops the bar for where one's emissions from what kind of business is reportable or needs to be reported, lowers it tenfold from 0.002% to 0.02. So the point of that and the point of what we're talking about here is this changes also the fee structure from for many of the businesses in the cap from 2,000 to 10,000 and allows the city to set that a course. But I think that we're talking about our program here, and as the only one in the state that currently exists. The question I would have is how many new businesses are going to be added to this program as a result of these changes, and how much more are current businesses going to pay, and how much more are new businesses now going to have to pay. After we just got done with a conversation about the wisdom of us regulating based only on a public interest, I'm certainly interested in doing that. If somebody's doing stuff that is potentially dangerous, I want to know about it. And I think that's reasonable. I think most people do. But I wonder if these changes aren't, I wouldn't call these changes reasonable or small. I would call them pretty pronounced, pretty severe changes to an existing program that are going to take in a good deal more geography of potential local businesses that will have to comply, and it'll cost them a great deal to do so. So I'm a little hesitant with my desire to want to support this bill. If I were going to make a motion today, it would be opposed party one. But I'm interested in my colleagues' discussions.
I have a couple more in the queue, but I just want to ask for clarification. The cap is voluntary, not mandatory. The City of Eugene does not have to raise its cap. This legislation gives us the option to do so, correct? The authority to do so.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, but that's an important distinction, that it simply opens that door for other communities to do this, and they can go as high as we want. We don't have to, as a city, change our fee structure.
Correct.
By supporting this state legislation. Okay. Chris.
Yeah, a lot of the decisions of this kind for me are built around reflecting what the community wants. I mean, I have my own personal opinion, and that I think should be the minority to what the community wants. And I think the community wants to know this information to the degree that it voted to create a charter amendment to set this all up in place. So I think that pretty clearly says the community wants this. So the question then is, to what degree do they want it, and to what degree do they want to expand it or increase its reporting or whatever? And we don't know that without having done a poll. But I do know the community does want it. So the question then is, I have to exercise my judgment on how much more they would want versus what they have now. And so I don't know what is a ton of toxic material enough? Is a half a ton okay? Where does that go? I don't know where that goes, but I know that a half a ton of toxic material is something I might want to know about. So even though it's half, if not less than half, it's still a lot, and it might be worth knowing what businesses are potentially dealing with a half a ton of toxic material. So for me then, wanting to have that information, wanting to know, I don't want them to have to pay an undue amount of money to get there. So I think we would definitely want to consider the appropriate amount, not just the amount that we can charge. So we may be able to charge $10,000, but I don't necessarily want to charge $10,000. It's like the door tax on the rental housing code. It needs to be the appropriate amount, not just whatever you can get. And I think that would be a very compelling need for me, is to know what's the appropriate amount that you really need to administer this program. And the second thing would be to make it as easy and burden-free as possible to comply. If we're gonna take the existing businesses and we're gonna add new businesses and we're gonna add new oversight and new reporting requirements, I want to make them as unobtrusive and as easy as possible to comply. So I would want us to devote a lot of effort to figuring out a way to make it as easy to comply with these requirements. And if you add new businesses in, make it easy for them. For example, if there's a reporting requirement that the feds have, the state have, and the city have, and they're all different forms, that's a lot of paperwork. So would there be some way that we could unify or coordinate the paperwork so that I may only have to fill out one form that would satisfy all three agencies? That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. I don't want to create an undue burden as I'm trying to create more information. I want more information, but I don't want to make it excessively burdensome to do that. So I think those would be my interests. I'm basically supportive, and I would be supportive, but I would be supportive in a way that doesn't create new problems even as it tries to solve old ones.
Alan?
So the community pretty overwhelmingly supported this when we had it on the ballot. What year was that to put it in place?
1996.
1996. That's quite a long time ago. It's 20 years ago. And these two bills, this just creates the rules and allows cities to opt into it, right? It doesn't require the entire state to do it.
Right, House Bill 2669 is voluntary.
Right, it's voluntary. So if you want to do it, here's the rules. And so it creates, I'm trying to narrow down into the specific impacts on us. In particular, the two biggies seem to be the dollar amount, the fee structure, which gives us the authority but not require it to go up to $10,000. So I have a question to come back to that one. The other one is the reporting requirements. Would those reporting requirements become our reporting requirements, or they would, is it the same deal with the fee structure that we could, it gives us the authority to lower it from 2,600 something to 1,000 pounds and some of the other specific ones. We could go there, but we don't have to. We could do no changes.
I have to look into lowering the reporting threshold if that would be passed, if this bill passed, or if we would still be able to have that as optional.
So, Alan, I can answer that because I was actually just looking at the bill. And the answer is the way the bill is currently crafted, I don't know what the intent is, but the strict language of the bill, we would not be required. That particular section that lowers it actually says any local government that, quote, establishes or enacts, as opposed to language elsewhere in the bill which talks about establish, enforce, or enact. We already have it on the books. We are not enacting it, and we are not establishing it. The bill can easily be amended, especially if that wasn't the intent. If the intent was to cover everything, or everybody, including us, all they have to do is change it from any local government that establishes or enacts to any local government that establishes, enacts, or enforces. At that point, lowering it to 1,000 pounds would be mandatory, because this is written so that if you have a program and you fall into this subsection, then you shall require all employees with a total output of 1,000 pounds to then do certain
As it
things.
stands now, it's not required.
Correct.
How many businesses are in our program in Eugene?
We have 35 reporting businesses and an additional 47 non-reporting.
What does it mean to be non-reporting?
So what that means is when those businesses were identified of meeting the criteria to be in the program of being within Eugene city limits, having at least 10 full-time equivalent employees, and using hazardous substances in their manufacturing processes, as well as being a manufacturer, we have a little process that we go through to help determine what their output level is, and it did not equate to the 2,640 pounds. But some of them did meet the 1,000 pounds even at that time, and a number of those businesses have grown. So that is the first group of businesses I would retouch base with on the hazardous substance amounts they're emitting.
Clearly, if we were to adopt the 1,000 pound, then we would have more folks in the program, more businesses in the program. Okay, so then if we did have more reporting, we'd increase the number, but we'd also increase the cost. That goes back to the structural problem that we have with it, which is right now we charge all the businesses the same regardless.
Yes.
It's all $2,000 if you're gigantic.
No, we base our fee on per FTE. So if they have that, and then there is a complicated calculation, but businesses with, it's usually between 30 and 40. If they have that many FTE or more, they pay the $2,000 cap, and anything less pay the per FTE cost.
What's your guess at how many pay less?
Less.
Than 2,000.
This is a guess. Probably about 25.
Out of the 80. Third. Okay, so if we were to adopt these new things, like the new fee structure or the reporting requirements, then this is an ordinance, and we would have to go through the ordinance process of a public hearing, hear from the public, and all the other things, correct? in order to adopt new rules?
Do we adopt the fees by ordinance or resolution? By ordinance. So yes, then to change the fee, it would need to be an ordinance change.
If we ever decide to do that, we will hear from the public.
Yes.
We'll have a public hearing. Okay. I'm curious as to our neutral position on this. This is our idea, and here's a bill that comes in and says, if Eugene's idea, if you want to do it, here it is. I'm curious why we took a neutral position on it, and especially in light of, well, the Toxic Right to Know board took a supportive position, but that was after the execs took a position, right? So why are we neutral on support? We do.
Mayor, this is Ethan Nelson. Can I jump in there?
Yes, you can.
I would say that the reason why we provide neutral support opposed is that in this specific instance, while there is existing council policy and city policy, it was not included in our intergovernmental relations framework for this year. And so staff, recognizing that there's some discussion at council needed to happen, we wanted to put forward a neutral, recognizing that it is a priority one that we would want to track and spend a bunch of time making sure that we were kind of watching this and navigating, but we also wanted to respect that council hadn't, in this current iteration on this bill, taken a specific position. And I think that's why when we had spoken internally, we landed on a neutral.
In absence of council position. Got it.
Yeah.
And so the next one up would be support priority 1, and there's support priority 2. Maybe you can explain those.
Yes, Councilor Zelenka. What I would say is that whatever council wants to do in regards to support or oppose in regards, I think that there's going to be enough details within that we'd want to spend some time working through amendments. And so however council lands on a support or oppose when you're getting through your votes, it would be great if it had with amendments. And so an example would be what's the reporting structure going to look like for both at a municipality level or for a business level that would be adopted statewide, and you'd have a business that's working, having operations both within the city of Eugene under our regime, our reporting regime, and then also at statewide under another municipality's regime, but having those be consistent so that it reduces any additional burden, but also allows for consistency between reporting systems. And so I think that would be one area where we would ask for some flexibility to work on amendments with that kind of support or oppose wherever you land.
And Alan, what I would say with the question of what's the difference between priority 1 and priority 2 and priority 3, it's really the intensity and the level of lobbying and engagement that staff does. So if it's a priority 1, we do that pretty intensely because we know then it's a high priority for the council to impact that particular legislation. If it's a priority 3, we tend to monitor, but we don't spend a lot of time actively engaging in a particular lobbying effort. So it's just the gradient of how active we are and how engaged we are in a particular issue.
So right now we're neutral, and if we want to change that, we have to make a motion.
My understanding is the IGR looked at this, right, and had a split vote?
Well,
Did you have
we didn't
okay.
vote. We didn't vote. I
don't know.
I just have a question about this reporting point that Ethan has just made. If our ordinance exists as it is and is the way we function, and we would have to opt into the state, it doesn't seem to me that if we're not opting into the state system, it doesn't matter what the reporting. I mean, I understand the concern. I mean, but I'm just saying in terms of an immediate thing, if this passed tomorrow and we didn't opt in, it doesn't affect our reporting anyway. We're just doing a local thing. We're not participating in it. This doesn't require us to participate in the statewide reporting system, correct?
From what I understand, yes, that's correct.
Okay. just needed that clarification. Emily, I think you're up.
Thank you. I was wondering about the fee structure also and understanding the FTE part. Is there also a different structure depending on how much toxic stuff they make?
Well, right now, under the Eugene program, our fee structure is based solely on per FTE, and then adding in the $2,000 cap piece. What this is proposing, it would give us an option, if we wanted to use it, to also add in on top of the FTE the pounds of chemicals emitted by a business.
Thank you. That's what I was remembering. I think this is really, really important because, yes, we're protecting ourselves. We're never protecting ourselves enough, but we live in Oregon, not just Eugene, and I would really like to see the state protected more from toxics. Yes, I see how there could be more reporting, it could take more time, but I think safety is worth some trouble. I think businesses that are profiting from our risk should pay for doing so. So I'm in favor of supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. What we adopt or don't adopt at any future time can be a different kind of conversation, and I think some valuable points were brought up about duplication. I think Chris mentioned that. There are a number of things at DEQ and otherwise in federal reporting that are covered here. We created by charter, as Alan mentioned, this local opportunity. My question, and it's for Ethan, if he can still hear me and weigh in, is who brought this particular bill forward and with what intent, to the degree that you know it? The reason, and I'll speak to why afterwards. Can you still hear me, Ethan?
Yes, Councilor Clark. To the best of my understanding, it's a kind of a grouping of Portland area legislators who brought this forward, and I think it was a response to the glass factory issues that happened, I don't know, about 9 months, 12 months ago, where there was residual toxics that were in people's gardening soil and such. So I think that was really the genesis of this at the current level, and so but we do have local legislators who've signed on in support of it. And Joe, if you have any more to add, can you jump in?
No, that's exactly it. It really came about because of the air quality issues that were brought to attention up in Portland area, which really kind of got people looking. Well,
I didn't mean to pass you, by the way.
Oh, no,
Joe,
that's okay.
in asking that question. Obviously, you've got some history in this, and I should have asked you first. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I understand that we have a different composition of our legislature today than we've had in the past, say in the 90s, or at times when the partisan split of the legislature was such that altering something like this, altering the limits to ours, was significantly harder to do than it is today. And I wonder to what extent, I suppose rhetorically, that plays a part in this legislation coming forward at this time. I too have said multiple times, as Alan did, and I've said before, that even with things that with other things that I may not have been in favor of, when the community passes that, that's the end of the discussion. From my perspective, and I'm consistent in every case, whether it was the auditor and their supervisor to any particular item at all. When we ask the people of our community to weigh in and decide, that's it for me. That's the last part of the discussion, and I would never want to alter that. So in this case, the community having weighed in that they want this, that's important to me as well. This is a program we're absolutely going to maintain without question. My questions, like Chris's, are more around reasonableness and the added burdens and the maybe unintentional harm that we're doing to community members. And by that, I mean the undue burdens economically at a time when we want most to increase a particular type of business in our community, and that's manufacturing. Well, it's very clearly the most targeted, this is the thing we have to increase in our community in order for our economic, well-being to get better, is manufacturing. And so hampering ourselves overly or excessively in such a case doesn't seem wise to me. And I'm honestly not sure, based on these numbers, where that line exists either, and I'd need more information.
Alan?
Did Claire want to say anything?
Claire, do you want to weigh in on this?
Before I go.
No, thank you. I'm taking in the conversation.
Okay, all right, good.
There is a hearing in Salem on March 20th, so that's why we're having this conversation. So it's very timely. This is our idea. I think we should support it. And especially since if we make any changes that locally, that these don't require us to do that, and that if we do make any changes, we'll have to change our ordinance, which will require us a public hearing and thoughtful presentations from staff and impacts analysis, and all those things will go along with any local changes. None of this is required as it stands right now. So I'm fine with saying these are good rules, and if we want to adopt them, we have to go through our process and hear from the public and make and deliberate on it, make a good decision. Also note that the Toxic Board supports it. Also note that Senator Barnhart and Holvey are in support of Senate Bill 995, which is a companion bill to 2699. So
Promoted them.
I said representatives. They are supportive of a Senate bill, which is interesting.
I see.
So it is, but it is the companion bill. So they're kind of lockstep. So they're both the same thing, more or less. So with all those things in mind, I would move to adopt a position of support.
At what level?
I will second that.
We are.
Okay.
Two.
Any other discussion? I do have one thing I want to say, but I want to leave it to others. So I also want to just reiterate that what we are doing is opening the door for other communities in our state to do what we have done and to do it with some kind of consistency and clarity. And I think there's a larger good here. This is not a question that is specifically about Eugene. It is about our state and opening this opportunity for others. And we have time in a deliberative process to determine the extent to which we will shift to meet this different state set of criteria. So just want to say that. Mike.
I would say that, with all due respect, Mayor, I would characterize this much differently in that if this were the simple extension of our current program under current conditions supported by our community statewide for everybody to be able to participate as well, I'd support it priority one. But that's not what this is. This is a dramatic change. It's providing the opportunity for us and other communities to make a dramatic change to what we do. For those conspiracy-minded, however you want to call them, to snare in the net those businesses who aren't currently under the auspices of this regulation today, and to bring in a good deal more, to potentially double or triple the number of businesses that have the new recording, and then to give the capacity to increase their costs 500% for doing so. So, with respect, I think it's not just extending what we do to other parts of this, or the opportunity for that. I think it's a fairly massive change. And that gives me a good deal of concern when we don't know at this table how many more businesses we're talking about. We don't know the impacts, and we can't know. So it gives me some concern.
I just want to note that we have 1 minute left. Can we
Move to extend 10 minutes.
All right.
Second.
In favor? All right, great. Claire, are you in favor?
I vote sure.
Okay, perfect.
She votes sure.
She votes sure. Got it. Okay.
You bet.
Okay, Alan, no, Emily.
The $10,000 cap, is that required for cities other than us, or do they have the same play that we do in how much of a cap they want?
No, our cap is currently at $2,000, and it would give Eugene the option to go up to $10,000. Doesn't mean we have to.
No, I'm not talking about us, other cities.
Oh, I'm sorry. It gives them the same option also.
Okay, so it wouldn't be required 500%. They could decide.
So let me tell you, I'm not exactly sure how the cap would affect Eugene. The reason, the charter amendment does not contain a cap. We processed fees differently before the legislature imposed that cap. When that cap got imposed, then it meant we had to process fees a certain way because the charter requires that all the fees related to this program be paid, or all the expenses of this program be paid for by the fees from the program. So if the cap goes up, it is possible that we will come back to you and say, the interplay between the cap going up and the charter actually requires you to adjust our fees as opposed to allowing you to adjust our fees. Because right now, what's happened as a result of the cap at $2,000 being in place, there are some companies that are paying a higher FTE fee than they would pay if there wasn't a cap. When the cap went into place, companies, the absolute amount they paid, might have been this variation. When the cap went into play or into effect, these companies only paid this much. The program had to raise the same amount of money, which meant these companies had to pay more.
Might pay less. So some people might pay less.
Exactly. So I just don't want you to think that this has no effect on us. If it's adopted exactly the way it's written at the moment, there may be an effect. I can't tell you there is because I haven't done the analysis. Okay.
How does it work that with the new cap it would go down if it's based on FTEs?
So let's say that right now the cost of the entire program is $100 and some companies are paying $3 because that's where the cap is, and some companies are paying $2. If the cap goes up to, let's say the cap goes up to $5, then there are some companies, because they might have 100 employees, who now can pay $5 total. Yeah. You're still raising the same amount of revenue, so the other companies pay less.
Okay, thank you. We may need more manufacturing, but I don't want manufacturing that makes more toxics. So I still favor this bill.
All right. Any other, Alan, did you want
I was just going to comment that it still seems like the changes that are in this bill are not necessarily required for us to do it. So we could probably potentially walk away with supporting this bill and not have any changes at all to ours. If we did, it would all come back to this table. We would make the decisions with public input through public hearing. So that process would go forward in its usual manner with public input.
City Manager?
What will be helpful for us is if you put a priority on that support, else we're not quite sure how much energy to put into it. So if it's a priority 1, 2, or 3 support, that would be helpful for us in our efforts.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So the question is, there's a hearing on Monday. Mm-hmm. So if it's a priority 2, do we go to the hearing? If a priority 1, do we go to the hearing? I mean, how do you, what does that actually mean?
Ethan, are you still there?
Yeah, Mayor, if it's a priority 1, we will put together testimony and head on up there, and if possible, we'll see if a council would like to attend. So we'll also lobby the bill outside of the public hearing, make meetings with committee members and other legislators.
And if it's a priority 2, what would we do?
If it's priority 2, more than likely we would just submit public testimony in support of, if it's a support.
So, and in that case, we can also include any concerns that we might have about it in that testimony, or we would.
Yeah, so it could be a difference, Ethan. What I'm understanding is in priority 1, we may actually try to get somebody up there in front of the committees. Priority 2, we may submit written testimony. And so there's a little bit difference in energy.
Mike?
Yeah, and I would just add that we would spend a lot more time in offices rather than just within a committee hearing.
In priority 1?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. More of a full court press.
Thank you, Mayor. I've had a couple of opportunities for conversation with Lisa Arkin around this and got an email from her this morning. And one of the things that she both said, and it's the only reason I'm saying this out loud as a part of our private conversation, because it's germane to the council's decision. One of the pieces that is still in discussion at the legislation in Salem is also about the hearing that's going to take place on the 20th, is that cap. One of the pieces that she mentioned was negotiable, was what that number was. Now, I would be a good deal more willing to be supportive of Ethan's work on behalf of supporting this at the state level if that were a piece that could get negotiated down. Lisa suggested that it still be in the interest of her, not as the Toxics Board chair, but in her professional world, she'd still be interested in it if it was a $5,000 cap instead of a 10. That would be, sufficient for her of cutting it in half. And so I would, I suppose, offer the friendly that we support, with the caveat that we ask Ethan to work in the conversations he has with legislators towards that amendment of 5,000, of lowering the cap. And I'll leave the number off, just lowering the cap.
As a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll accept that as a friendly. Who was the second?
I was, and I agree with it, oddly. Yes.
Okay, so
So that would mean it's a priority. Staff.
I pulled a
support
David
one.
Kelly, and he's gone already.
That would be support one.
I seconded it, so
I seconded it too, but apparently no one heard me.
We're on mute.
So wait a second.
Emily's the
Could
third.
we hear the motion again? What are we?
Glenn.
What I heard the motion was is that the city will support during the hearing House Bill 2669 with, including the friendly, with a request that the cap be negotiated down, but not to any particular level. I have not yet heard that this is priority 1, 2, or 3.
One. Well, if you're going to do testimony and also do amendments, that's not 2.
Well, you could, Ethan could still send a letter of support saying we support but believe that the cap should be lowered to some number, and that would still be a priority too. The question that you want to be thinking about is, given the other bills that you have said are priority 1, does this really rise to the same level? Because anytime Ethan and others spend lobbying this bill is time they're not spending lobbying the other bills. So how do you prioritize this related to the other?
2.
So the motion would be that city staff are directed to support at a priority to this bill with a request as part of any testimony that's submitted that the cap be reduced.
Okay.
Mayor, can I be in the queue?
Yes, you're at the head of the line there. Go for it.
Thank you. So I would support that priority 2 designation. I think that's appropriate given the potentially minimal impact on Eugene that this legislation would have. And our other priorities, I would support putting it as a priority 2 in terms of our staff time.
Okay, so are we? Yes. Oh, Ethan, yes.
Just
Ethan.
Hi, welcome.
and Ethan Nelson.
The ether.
The other aspect, and I was just talking with Joe about this, is that if with the amendments for support, what would be really helpful is that if we've got also direction in regards to leading with Eugene's reporting requirements and mechanism to make sure that we've got as much consistency as possible so that any statewide program we're the example rather than we have to change ours. And so
We're all for that. We're all for that.
if I could, Mayor.
Yeah. Mike.
That was a big part of this discussion, whether or not we have to change anything. So it seems by your question, you're implying that if this does pass, there may be several changes we would have to make.
Councilor Hark, I'm not sure, but we want the flexibility that as we're getting on into the details of this, that if something comes on up, that we've got an ability to then have your direction to say, yes, we want to amend not just on the cap, but also on some of the details.
Leave it the way ours is.
To try to lead as much as possible
Gotcha.
with our system.
Okay, thank you.
I take that as a friendly. Yeah.
Okay.
Second does as well.
All right. So are we ready to vote on this? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Claire?
I vote yes, along with my cat.
Okay. No opposed.
That couldn't have been better
We're
timing.
good. We've gotten the direction, and we just made it. So thank you, Ethan. Thank you very much for racing, and Joe, thank you very much for your reporting. That was great.
That was funny.
That was
Wonder
awesome.
how her
Cat,
kitchen's-
thanks to the cat, Claire.
Start a break.
Absolutely perfect timing.
Perfect
Couldn't
timing.
get better.
Okay.